We're letting our folks into the Zoom call as well. Hey, everybody, welcome to Zoom. Good to see you. Happy Fourth of July.
Happy Fourth of July.
We're about to get started here. I'll do an intro of the program. We'll intro our guest, and we'll get right into it. If this is your first time here, you'll get a sense of what's going on, and you're welcome to join us and find out how to jump in the Zoom room directly next time you're around. But yeah, this is Piano Tech Radio Hour. And what we do is we gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. That could include manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano technicians. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to this program for just $16 a month, and you get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in our member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. Always like to remind you we have a podcast audio only version of the program at pianotechradio.com. We've reached top 100, top 10, even number one status in the performing arts category on iTunes and various locales throughout the globe. We also have a Substack where we have some written content that gives you a sneak peek into our member area and some of the advanced piano topics you can learn about. And then we have our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and our email list, which you can sign up for at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com with just your name and email. All right, without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest for the day and get into the conversation. His name is Uri Caine. He is an internationally acclaimed pianist, composer, and arranger whose career has crossed the boundaries of jazz, classical, and contemporary music. And since moving to New York, 1985, he has released more than 30 albums as a leader, collaborated with many of today's most respected musicians, and composed works for leading orchestras and ensembles around the world. His inventive artistry continues to inspire audiences through performances, recordings, and groundbreaking creative projects. Ori, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Um, yes, thanks for joining us. It's the 4th of July, and I know you got some family stuff going on today, so I appreciate you taking the time for us.
I'm happy to
Um,
do it. Happy to do it.
so one of the things that we love to do with our first inquiry is to go back down memory lane and think about your first exposure to music or piano and how you first started to see the glimpses that this was actually going to become your life. Tell us the story of how that got started.
I started taking piano lessons as a little kid. I was about 7 years old. My mother played the piano, as an amateur, and all my brothers and sisters took lessons. And I was sort of moderately into it. I enjoyed it, but I didn't really maybe understand what was going on. A little bit later, I was about 11 or 12 years old. My mother took me to a jazz concert in Philadelphia, where I grew up. And the pianist was a great pianist named Bernard Pfeiffer, who was actually a French pianist who had escaped from Paris during World War II, moved to New York, and then after living in New York for a couple of years, came to Philadelphia and ended up teaching a lot of the pianists. But he became my guru. When I would say when I was about 12 years old, I went to study with him, and I gradually, and not so gradually, started to realize how deep music was just from experiencing it through him, but also because he was a very practical teacher. And as my high school years went on, I would start to ask him, I was starting to play in little ensembles. How do you prepare for that? Then somebody asked me to do the school show. And it's like, how do you do that? Somebody said, we want you to accompany a choir singing some songs. And all these things became sort of these ways of of teaching, me, and I guess a lot of the younger students that he had at that point, that, you have to break it down in a certain way, but there's an art to it. There's a beauty to it. There's a way to do things, and there's different ways to do things. And as I saw the flexibility of it, and I guess also the um, combination of personalities and studying the tradition, and also thinking about what I wanted to do because of what I was dealing with among people my own age, he encouraged that. And he also encouraged me to start practicing classical music, even though I thought, I'm done with that. I want to be a jazz musician. He said, no, you should really keep on practicing. For instance, do you know every chord in that Schumann piece that you played? Can you identify all the chord changes in the Bach pieces that we're playing? Because you should be able to hear that. Then he turned me on to a composer that lived in Philadelphia named George Rochberg, who was coming from a different school of thought. He was much more like a contemporary composer. He was writing 12-tone music. But as he was getting older, he decided to sort of write music that sort of related much more to the past. And I met him when I was about 14, and he told me, he said, all my students all want to be Anton Webern and Schoenberg and write all this stuff. But if you study with me, I'm going to ask you every week, write a Bach prelude, write a development section of a Mozart sonata, write a cadenza for a Beethoven concerto. And at the beginning, I was like, wow, how do you do this? And he said, you have to study. You have to study the music. You have to figure it out for yourself. And I think between those two teachers, this idea of sort of concentrating in a certain way to get knowledge, but then somehow through experience and practice and trying it out with different people, you start to find the way. And you know, for me, it really worked because at the same time that I was sort of getting this head of, that you really have to study so many things to be a musician. And you have to study the history, you have to study these instruments, you have to get to know all these different things. But it's also a very social world. It's not like you're a necessarily like a novelist that has to sit in his attic for 2 years to write. Here you can go and ask the clarinet player, like, what note is works? Why? All these things that you can do. And again, I love that aspect of it because it was such a social thing. And especially growing up in Philadelphia, as I got a little bit older and started playing with a lot of older musicians, I really saw that, all these guys have different styles of how they play. Some of them want you to play a lot behind them. Others don't want you to play that much at all. Some of them want you to learn all their music and you have to show up. Others are really totally casual, like, what do you guys want to play? And so I started to see that aspect of music making as well, that there's a personal aspect and that there's all these personalities and opportunities to express yourself in different ways. But the important thing was, especially if you're dealing with groups, that there has to be a group dynamic which makes it happen. And even though people can be very talented, if the group doesn't come together, then that's another aspect of it. So I would say all those things really were part of my upbringing as a musician. And, like a lot of musicians, I had to go through a lot of different experiences to sort of see which styles of music and styles of groups and uh, ways of thinking about music that you had to be very flexible. And I found that to be, especially as a pianist, you have a lot of opportunity to play in a lot of different situations. And I was getting those opportunities. Sometimes I would play like in these cocktail bars as a solo pianist for hours. Other times with the trio, other times with the singer, like I said, with the accompanying the choir. I got into a thing where I would play for dance classes, and there's sort of an expectation how you play for that. And then as you get older, you realize there's guys that are playing really straight ahead jazz. There's guys that want to play more far out music. There's guys that are really want you to play what they've written. There's other guys that say, just listen and hear what's going on. And through all those experiences, again, you're getting this sort of idea that it's a very flexible, large world, but you have to be specific once you get into the actual making of it and be able to take criticism and be able to listen to yourself and think, that wasn't as good as I could do it. How do I practice to get to the next level? All those things sort of build a certain type of character that I think, if you have good teachers and you're in a situation where you're not being intimidated. I don't like these musical situations that I started to see as I got older, where, the band leader is yelling at all these kids and the kids are like 13 years old. It's like, I don't like that for music. I would rather it be a more, what do you want to do? Okay, now
Mhm.
let's see how you can do it. Even if it's like you got to practice a lot. It's not so easy to play like Art Tatum, but I mean, you can listen to it at some point and absorb it and then get your own thing. Even if you get to that point and said, I'll never be Art Tatum, but I still want to express myself with what I can do with it. That's a beautiful thing too.
Wonderful. Gives a lot of foundation there. I've got so many different directions we can go into. I'm going to go back to the first thing that came to mind, you being from Philadelphia, and I'm thinking of a an album that was actually quite meaningful in my history. So I went to Rutgers University. I studied jazz
Okay.
piano there. So
All right.
you had some of that Philly influence because it's kind of halfway in between Philadelphia and New York City. Um,
Absolutely.
and I also have some connections with Philly now these days. But I was in this band with some of my fellow students, and we kind of had the jazz funk thing going on, right?
Okay.
And so one of the guys brought in this album called the Philadelphia Experiment, and so we played this tune called Grover,
Right.
and uh, and so that just kind of makes me think about your kind of experience there. Getting involved. That was really. uh, Was there only one album from Philadelphia Experiment?
I think they made another one that was sort of a remix of it, but the
Okay.
the problem with that group was it was almost impossible to get everybody together
Yes. Okay.
because everybody was so busy. And literally, we would have concerts that would be canceled because one person would say, "I can't. I have this other thing. I have to do it." So we
Right.
sort of gave up on that. When Chris McBride became the head of the Newport Jazz Festival, that he was able to organize because he got Quest with his group and he brought my group, and so he knew we would all be there together. But no, I mean, that group was sort of a combination of a lot of different things, in the sense that, first of all, just talking about Grover. So when
Hmm.
I was coming up, I was playing mostly with straight ahead guys, but I met Grover Washington on this very strange tour in Pennsylvania where we played at every prison in Pennsylvania. And first I was sort of like, wow, that's going to be interesting. But what I realized what was happening was that every prison, the leader of the group was a drummer who was also a judge in Philadelphia. So after the gigs, all the guys would get in line and he would start writing down stuff, talk to my parole officer. It was just a way to get into the prison. But meanwhile, got to hang out with Grover Washington and just see how he was dealing with it. And I remember when I started playing with him, a lot of the more straight ahead or more avant-garde guys said, "How can you play with a guy like that? Because it's basically pop jazz. It's not serious." I said, "It's serious because if you have to play in a group like that, you have to concentrate on what's going on in the group. And a lot of it has to do with accompaniment, staying out of the way, but keeping it at a certain intensity level." And so I started to realize from an experience like that, oh, there's certain people that really don't like this person and this music. To me, I'm not dealing with it on that level at all. I'm trying to do the gig. And because I know the person and have seen him in situations maybe that other people haven't seen him, it's no problem. I want to do a good job for him. And so that's how I sort of got into that world. Even though I think Grover Washington probably realized at some point that I was not, I- you know, that wasn't going to be my world.
Right.
There was enough of an understanding. I mean, he was older than I was. But in terms of that group happened because at a certain point, the Knitting Factory, which was a club in New York City that a lot of people played in the 80s and 90s, had a record company. And the guy that was running it was from Philadelphia, named Andy Hurwitz. And so his idea was to put together these groups based on cities. And because he came from Philly, he knew Questlove, he knew Chris McBride. I mean, we all knew each other, but his idea was, look, let's just go to a studio. We're going to go and see what happens. And as time went on, that became more specific. They said, let's just play music that's Philly centric. In other words, either written by older Philadelphia musicians that we knew, and we'll see how it goes. And it was an interesting session because it wasn't really clear what was going on. You know,
Hmm.
Questlove is in his world. I remember Pat Martino was there. Pat Martino was sort of saying, what's going on here? Where's the tunes? It's like, we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to groove. We're going to vamp. If somebody can bring in a song or two, that's fine. But basically, we're going to record and then we're going to mix it. And in a way, you guys aren't going to be at the mixing session. Do you know what I mean? Which is another aspect of it, which maybe doesn't happen in more jazz-oriented things. But then it sort of got a life of its own, you know. And I remember when it came out that a lot of people would say, "Oh, we really like that record," or there was a reaction to it. And again, it's just one of those things that I could have never predicted that all those things would have happened, you know, because I mean, I remember one time we went into the prison in Philadelphia. I don't know if you know about the Move incident where there was a group that was bombed by the Philadelphia police and they burned down a whole block in Philadelphia. This is in the
Hmm.
80s.
Hmm.
So we went in to play and they had dressed these guys from this particular political group all in orange and segregated them. But they said to us they wanted to come up and rap while we played. So we said, sure. And as soon as the guards saw that, they shut the concerts down. They put us in a room. They said, you guys committed a, you know, like you almost started a revolution in the prison. We said, why? Just because some guys want to get up and rap? And he said, do you know who those guys are? I said, yeah, of course I know who they are. I know who they are. But I mean, they're sort of under your control, aren't they? And again, it was one of those things like the music sort of enters into these crazy things, and then you sort of have to be like, okay, whatever. But
Hmm.
that whole, and Grover was there too. He saw it. He was very sort of like, wow, man, this is getting, but it's, those are the types of things in my life, I think, that are, it's just interesting because you wouldn't have expected, like in a lot of people's lives, that this confluence of things happened and then boom, here we are. But I'm
Hmm.
glad you like the music, you know, because we had a great time playing it.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree with those who find it to be a great work. Um, it's funny too. I put together a concert in New York, just a small, one at a bar in Gowanus,
Hmm?
and had some of our I have a piano tuning business there in New York, Photo Piano Factory, and we brought some of our clientele, and some people played and all this stuff. But one of my friends came by, and he was actually wrongfully imprisoned for decades, and
Hmm.
he's a prison activist now. And also, my father worked in the prison system in Michigan as a psychologist and
Hmm.
therapist, and did kind of art therapy and things with folks. Um,
Wow.
so I've never done it, but you're reminding me. I kind of have it on my bucket list to bring some music to the prison system. I do think that's a
No,
very thing to do. Yeah.
it's an interesting thing because even within the prison system, like at a tour like that, you see very quickly the sociology of the prison system because I would say the more white collar prisoners were at a prison called Allenwood, where there was actually some famous guys that we could recognize because they were politicians. But then when you went into some of these either prisons in Philadelphia, like Holmesburg, which I think they closed, Graterford, they were very tough prisons, or the types of prisons that are really literally in the middle of nowhere. But once you go there and there's thousands of guys and you're realizing, wow, this is something that a lot of people don't know about, that there's such a large prison population. and also getting to know the people that work in that as musicians, because that's an important thing. That's how we got that gig in the first place, not just because of this judge, but because of people, let's say like your father, that are working within that institution to try to help on some level by
Mhm.
bringing something positive. And the music was definitely that. So right away, that gave it a certain, I don't know. It was just very interesting. I mean, this was another good lesson. We played a Christmas concert. This was with another a saxophone player in Philadelphia named Bootsy Barnes. So we go up to the prison, and I would say literally half the people came up to sit in. These were all musicians from Philadelphia that had been put in prison for drug stuff. You know, they
Mhm.
had a joint or they had a little bit of cocaine, whatever. So they put them in prison. And we didn't have to play at all. All the guys came up to play, saxophone players, singers. It was like, man, what do you got? And it just was like, yeah, that's part of America too.
Mm.
Um, but again, the music is the thing that unified everybody.
Mm.
Nobody's going to ask the guy that's sitting in, what did you do to get in here? That you're not supposed to do that. But when you find out, no, like with all the stuff that this person might have done, and here he is playing My Funny Valentine so soulfully. Thank you,
Mm.
music.
Mm. Yeah, fascinating. Um, I would love to listen to some of your tunes here that you wanted to bring to the table today, so we can get exposed to the music of what you're thinking of contemporaneously. We're we're taking a walk down memory lane. But yeah, so I have three tracks I downloaded that you sent along. Do you have one that you might prefer to be our
I mean,
first
I,
exploration?
I wasn't sure exactly what to send, so I thought I would send stuff in different styles. The first
Okay.
one I think I sent was basically like a trio tune and sort of playing jazz straight ahead. It's a original tune. It's with a drummer that I played with a lot who passed away, unfortunately, named Ralph Peterson.
Oh, Ralph
And
Peterson. Yeah, he taught at Rutgers.
he taught at Rutgers.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And he was quite a character too.
Oh
And
yeah.
so he
Ligature of the line. That's the one.
Ligature of the line,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, continue. Sorry. Go ahead.
So anyway, I mean, it's much more of I think this was recorded maybe even 20 years ago, but it's the sort of the style of jazz that have been playing. I mean, I guess my style has sort of changed as the time has gone on in different directions, but this would be more of an example of straight ahead jazz piano. Wait a minute, I lost you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Just sharing the audio and we'll take a listen. Ready to go.
okay.
Very nice. I
Ralph
was,
is an intense drummer.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, he's really, he was really throwing in some things that were, I don't know, they were just kind of putting a whole new spin on whatever you were doing.
When I first started playing with him, a lot of people would tell me, especially when we went on the road, is that if you ever bring that guy back, you'll never get a gig here again because he's so rambunctious.
Oh,
And I would, yeah. And I said, I like that. So they would, which is another one of those things because that's a stylistic thing. I mean, I've played, and I could have brought other examples of much smoother. Um, and I like that too. But sometimes I like that push me pull. It's sort of more real. It's especially when a group is going through things and it doesn't always work, but I like that idea of that things can change that way. And it's not to everybody's taste all the time, but it's still an interesting aspect of playing music together.
hmm. And did you mention who the bass player was?
James Genus,
Okay.
he's I think if you watch Saturday Night Live, he's the bass player on Saturday Night Live. I mean, he got that gig a lot
Okay.
later.
Okay.
But back then I was playing in a lot of groups with him,
Hmm.
where we were like in the rhythm section. So we got to
Hmm.
know each other pretty well. He's from Virginia, originally, but he still lives in New York.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was struck by just how driving the bass was, and it was just
Yeah.
all, it was just like all
No,
quarter
no, he
notes
had to
like the
keep
whole
up.
way through.
He
And
had to
it
keep
was
up.
almost like he was keeping the kind of rhythm almost more than Ralph in some ways. And then I was very surprised to hear him take it in a totally different direction there at the end. Now, was that the
No,
way you
because
typically played it, or was that just kind of his solo for the for that
no, I
particular
think
scene?
it was more that it's more the thing of trying different things. In other words, if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's being rambunctious,
Mm-hmm.
you in a way become more, I have to focus.
Yep.
And if somebody is sort of, it seems like things are unclear, at some point somebody has to take the responsibility to make that somehow clear to the group. I mean, it doesn't always work out, and I'm not so uptight about that. I mean, I play in other musical situations, especially more classical situations, where that's not really, like people try to work something out and then stick with it. But I think when you're improvising, and it's interesting with Ralph because I knew Ralph a long time ago. Ralph's father and grandfather were both drummers. And
Mm.
Ralph's father was the police chief and the mayor of Pleasantville, New Jersey.
Oh.
So the first gig that I did with Ralph was at a political rally for his father. And it was like, Mr. Peterson and Senior Peterson, all these guys with huge handshakes, you know, all drummers, all checking us out. Like we're all
Mm.
sitting there going, okay, you can play, and just being in that whole situation, and it's just another one of these things where they knew a lot about music. They knew about the Atlantic City jazz scene, which is sort of another one of these stories that got destroyed once the casinos came in. Atlantic City changed,
Mm.
and a lot of that world is sort of gone. But there was a scene there, just like in a lot of these different places where there was different musicians. Some of them were well known, some of them were local guys, but that whole world is very interesting to me
Mm.
in in all these facets,
Mm.
both his music and his personalities of people that are dealing within you know a musical culture like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting to hear it from your perspective. And yeah, especially since I have a little bit of this overlap of your domain, a little Philly, a little New Jersey, a little New York.
No, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so tell me kind of what brought you to, I mean, of course, New York is a scene, like one of the biggest scenes to be in for music or culture or anything like that. So I can see what brought you there, but kind of what um, in your story, what was that moment where you said, I'm moving to New
I'll
York?
tell you. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the musicians that were older musicians who were playing in Philly were people like Philly Joe Jones, Mickey Roker, Hank Mobley. They had all lived in New York, and then one way or another had either moved back to Philly or decided that they were done with New York, or they still went to play in New York, but they lived in Philly because it was cheaper. And I played with all those guys, and at one point, they all told me in their own way, "You need to get out of Philly. You need to move to New York. It's 90 miles away." And I had already been going up there, and I had friends that had moved already there. But my life changed a lot because, as they would have predicted, because in Philly I was working all the time as the pianist. I had jobs even when I left home and I started to go to college. I went to college at Penn, and so I stayed in Philly and I lived in West Philly. I worked every night. On the weekends, we used to start playing at like 1 in the afternoon and finish at 5 in the morning, just go from place to place. There was a whole scene of all these bars and different types of places. And to me, I was just reveling in that, and as I said before, sort of experiencing all these different ways of doing music. But I think at some point, all those guys said to me, "You got to get out of here because you're too comfortable. Go to New York and see what you can do." And they were right, because the first couple years that I was there, I was doing gigs I had never done. I was playing like bar mitzvahs in Long Island and getting lost on the Long Island Expressway and going, "What am I doing?" And getting dressed up as a clown to play at a bar in the Waldorf Astoria and going, "Man, really?" But I mean, part of me was sort of like digging it on some level of like, this is really crazy. But gradually, and I think the thing in New York that's different is that people started to tell me, especially older guys there, "You're playing standards, you're playing a lot of the same stuff that older generations played. That's not what's going to make your thing stick out. You need to start playing with people your own age or younger and go for it." And that's what was happening anyway. So I was playing a lot with Don Byron, a clarinet player, another trumpeter named Dave Douglas. I was playing with old-fashioned guys like Buddy DeFranco and Terry Gibbs, but at the same time with people like Sam Rivers. So I was just trying to absorb it all and realizing, wow, this is different, because the thing that makes this part different is that these guys are basically barely working in New York City, even though we're meeting in New York. What they're doing is that they're going to Europe. This is like in the
Mm.
90s already, a little bit after I had been living there. And I started to see that there was a whole other world in Europe, where not only was there a sort of a wider palette of acceptable music, um, but also they knew the history, so it was like a situation where it's it was strange that we would play in American cities and not that many people would come to hear us, and then we would go to some obscure place in Europe and it would be packed. And we'd
Mm.
be like, "Wow, how did they even know about the music?" But the older guys who had already been there, people like the art ensemble, I remember we met them and they said, "You guys should all learn Italian," because we all learn Italian, man. We have so many gigs in Italy that, in a way, that's how we're supporting ourselves. We come back to New York and we play, and I fell into that world. And so
Mm.
that sort of saved me. And it was a paradox because I was spending not that much time in New York, even though people were saying, "Oh, you were like a New York guy." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, yeah." And that period lasted for a while for me, because first as a sideman, but then I hooked up with a German record company called, at first it was called JMT, but then he started another label, a man named Stefan Winter, called Winter and Winter. And I ended up making a lot of CDs with him, but also there was a break because his record company started out as being part of Polygram. And so that was during, sort of the Young Lions period. They really wanted jazz, straight ahead music, sort of what we just heard. But I had started doing these other projects involving classical music and maybe some more avant-garde music. And so that's what the guy from the record company wanted. And so I made a record of Mahler's music, um, which I didn't really expect it would have. I mean, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but all of a sudden I saw that it opened up another world for me. and for good and bad reasons, to be honest. Because if the Salzburg Festival calls you and says, "We want you to do that Mahler," and you're thinking, "I know, but why aren't you inviting people like Cecil Taylor and Sam Rivers to play at the South?" It's supposed to be this new music avant-garde festival. They never heard of those guys. And so it was like, oh, so just because somebody does Mahler, you think that, oh, so now they can be part of your circle. And I had to struggle with that because at the same time, I was playing the Mahler, let's say, at jazz festivals, and they were like, "What is this shit? I mean, why are you playing? Of all the things, this is not what we want to hear." Until I started to meet a lot of jazz musicians, people like Kirk Lightsey, who were Mahler scholars. They're like, "Why didn't you do this piece? And you should check out this." And then I realized, you know what? You just have to follow your own thing. No matter what you do, people have a comment on it. I mean, it's sort of an obvious thing as you get older, but I was so into all these scenes and I wasn't really sure what it all meant.
Mm,
And when I started to realize, you know what it means? It means that you're getting up in the morning with a group of musicians every day, you playing in a different place, and just go for it. And there's nothing better than that. Because even if you're not totally happy with what's going on with your music, or there's a sense that you can work on it and change it. And if you really have to change it in radical ways or subtle ways or all these different things, that's the joy of doing it. It's endless. You're never going to get to a point where you're like, this is perfect. It's it's just one of those things it's a process, but it's the joy of the process that keeps you in it.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Fascinating moving to New York and then going overseas so much too. I hadn't heard that type of story before. Would love to check out another track that you shared. And again, maybe a different vibe. Uh, have a suggestion for the next one?
So the next one, I chose a Mahler piece, and it doesn't have any piano in it. And
Okay.
so it's the idea of I ended up doing a lot of these classical projects and trying to do them in different ways. So I did a big thing on the Goldberg variations because I like the idea of theme and variations. It's something that as jazz musicians, we're very conscious of. Every time we take a standard, we take the harmony, we use that as the basis. So I like the idea of something like the Goldberg variations, where Bach does the same thing. He writes it ahead. It's 32 bars, 4 8-bar phrases, just like a standard. Every variation is either a canon or it's written in the style of a different nationality. It could be an Italian song, even at the end, he makes a joke by combining two German drinking songs that, of course, fit the harmony. So just that aspect of his genius to be able to, I mean, it's like choosing two standards that have to fit over another third pre-existing harmony. So I thought, okay, do the Goldberg variations, play Bach in different ways. You can have different instrumentations. You can refer to PDQ Bach and switched on Bach and Glenn Gould and all the things that you love, but also write other variations. If he's writing a Siciliano, let's say, like an Italian dance in 6/8, write a mambo. If he's doing, a tribute to Scarlatti, write a tribute to Monk, but always using the harmony. So that was more of an abstraction. But when I did Mahler, it was more about his life story because his life story is very complicated. And the example that I chose doesn't have any piano in it. It's taking a song, and so there's a choir singing the Mahler, even though Mahler didn't write that arrangement. I arranged it. It's just a song for solo singer and orchestra. But then add a gospel singer who is also from Philadelphia, who has been on many of my projects, to improvise over it and sort of marry these two traditions of vocal music. So this is called Only Love Beauty.
All right, let's check this one out. I believe I'm still sharing audio, so I'm gonna hit play. You hear it?
I hear it.
in the most high beauty. I love every day. It's beautiful, and thank you are so amazing so grateful, so grateful for everything that nobody but you, nobody but you, nobody but
Wow.
So
That's
just
pretty
as an
cool.
example, I ended up doing a lot of because Mahler's music sort of goes into many different. He's dealing with a lot of different types of folk music.
Mm.
He's setting Chinese texts. So I got a bunch of Chinese musicians to improvise on those texts and found out that actually those texts weren't really by the poet that he thought wrote it, but that's another story. Um, so that idea of taking a text and somehow trying to transform it through improvisation or arrangement is also another aspect of music making, which is very interesting to me, just because um, there's a long tradition of doing that, especially in classical music, but also in jazz music, where Duke Ellington, all these other people taking classical pieces. It's not so much about jazzing up classical music like a pianist like uh, French pianist Jacques Lussier. I mean, I like that, but it's basically just adding a swing beat to
Mm.
Bach, which is what it is. This is sort of trying to go into it somehow and use it as a springboard for improvisation.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's unique, like you said, it's not
It's not for everybody because, of course, people that are Mahler fanatics or Bach fanatics, they're very offended. They're like, "How can you do this?" And okay, there's an aspect to it that I agree with.
uh-huh.
There's also an aspect of it that's false because, Bach's music would have been lost if it hadn't been found by Mendelssohn like 40 years later in some, storage house. It's not like people knew that all the people that we venerate are going to be great, like many situations. It took a while for people to understand, oh, that happened, and now this can happen, and now that happened. And so I like that idea of in music history that things recur in cycles, but there's also definite reactions. Like, we've had enough of this. I mean, when Bach's youngest son sort of went for music lessons, he didn't want to deal with Bach. He was writing already like the new classical style of Mozart and Haydn, because that was what the new progressive music was. Do you know what I mean? And just like today, there's a lot of jazz musicians. I can't play straight ahead music anymore. It's too old fashioned. Fine. But then there's many young people that's what they play. That's their, and they're both valid. And
Mm.
I don't think we're in a contest here to see who, the world of music is big enough that you can hopefully include as many things as possible.
Mm. Yeah. And on that note, I'd love to, I don't know if we'll have time for the whole track, but I want to, since you did bring these different sort of genres in, I'd like to hear the third one.
The
If not
third
in
one
full.
is, I mean, this is another element of sort of that idea of uh, opportunities that I got where you're dealing with classical groups who don't improvise but want to play with you. So this is a piece written for the Arditi String Quartet. They're sort of a well-known contemporary string quartet. They play very complicated music and they've recorded many pieces. And, for me, what it was I wrote 12 different caprices, I called them, and then I'm improvising against them. I mean, the style is not necessarily jazzy. It's pretty atonal, but you'll hear what I mean. But at least it's this idea of improvisation versus structure.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear it. And forgive me if I
We
cut it
don't,
off just so in the
no
interest of
problem. You
time.
don't have to hear. Yeah.
Oops. Sorry, that's my
That was good.
um you probably caught my rigging coming in there at the same time. But
No problem.
yeah, I'm glad we got to get a taste of that. And so the musicians they had like fully written out parts on the score, or they kind of had.
No, no, no. I mean, I have written parts where I play with people that improvise, and I mean,
Yeah,
there's a way to do that. But with them, they told me expressly they don't improvise. They
put it
wanted
on a.
everything written out, even if you like,
Wow.
here's 5 notes, play them in any rhythm, or for five
Yeah,
seconds, play this
right.
series of rhythm. They didn't want to do that.
Just
They
write
wanted
it on the
everything written
staff.
out, which
Hmm,
is
interesting.
one of the aspects of dealing with classical musicians. Even if you're like playing a concerto that you wrote for an orchestra, you better be sure that you wrote the parts out so well that there's no question that they're going to start messing up a rehearsal by saying it's unclear here. And so you really have to go to school for that. I mean, not literally school, but a
Right.
book like I don't know, Behind Bars, which was written by the editor at Boozy and Hawks, where it's 600 pages of, when you write a rhythm, it has to ally. So everybody, if you 5/8 rhythm, 3 and 2, it has to show that so that one of the guys at Cleveland Orchestra told me, nobody's going to practice your music. They want to be able to sight read it. I said, oh, really? That's sort of depressing. And they said, no, it's sort of true. They can sight read. So you have to make sure that, and that, of course, that's much different than going into a recording session with Ralph Peterson.
Mm, mm,
So you just have to deal as you can with all the great musicians that you happen to meet in your life and try to make it possible to work out something.
Well, fascinating. Thank you for sharing this with us, and thanks for taking the time today. We probably should wrap up. We usually try to wrap it up
Okay.
right around the hour. Um, Usually ask for a few final thoughts from the guest. Any place you want to send us to a website, or you got a concert coming up, or an album, or whatever. And I'll do an outro and we'll call it. But yeah,
Okay.
any final thoughts?
I mean, I have some new music that's coming out that I'm still working on. So I would say that, I also try to maintain my website also, although at this point it's pretty far down. So my website has not so much my present gigs, but it has, my discography and also a way to contact me if people want to talk or want to get some music or whatever. Um, I have some composition projects coming up. I wrote a piece in honor of a civil rights leader, speaking about Philadelphia, who was murdered in Philadelphia. His name is Octavius Catto, and they built a uh, big statue outside of Philadelphia City Hall in his memory. He was murdered in 1871. The murderers were never really brought to justice. But when they wrote a book about him, maybe about 10 years ago, it's an incredible book. And it forced me to sort of study the history of Philadelphia, speaking the racial history of Philadelphia, and try to construct this sort of oratorio based on that. So I got a chance to play that with Philadelphia Orchestra, also Boston Symphony, and I've been playing it around. It's for choir, piano trio, the same gospel singer that was on the Mahler piece, and full orchestra. And again, it's very interesting to go around the world and play it with all these different groups because it's different every time. Some of them have no idea about the politics. Some of them are very worried about the politics. Some of them are also dealing with things that I never thought of. Like there's one scene when he's murdered where I have the percussionist play a starter pistol. Found that in Boston. That's illegal. You cannot have even a starter pistol because if you shoot it in the concert, somebody will think it's a real bullet. And that also happened in Philly. We did it at this concert that was free. 15,000 people came, and the guy forbade me from doing it. He said, if they hear that pistol, they're going to think it's a shootout. I said, are you serious? Man, look at the audience. Everybody was dressed up. It was like church. But they said, no, you can't do it. So it's something like that, again, that you don't really think about when you're writing. You think this could be a good idea. And then you realize, no, that's not going to happen. That piece is called The Passion of Octavius Catto. And I don't know. I mean, I have other stuff that's coming out, but I guess rather than go into all that, thank you so much for having me. And, I appreciate it. And it's what you do, by the way, is so important. Uh, I can't tell you how many times I've been saved by piano tuners and piano technicians. I'm serious. Even in big concerts where you would think that they are taking care of the piano, and then some guy has to come in at the last minute and tune it or fix it. And it's just so important. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Appreciate that. All right, I'll outro us. I just I'll end the session, but if you want to jump back on the Zoom real quick, you and I'll do a quick wrap up, and then we'll go for the day.
And let me ask you this: if any of the people that I'm seeing that are listening to this have any
Yeah.
questions and they want to talk, I'm happy to talk to them.
Okay.
I mean,
Absolutely.
if that's part of it.
Yeah, yeah. You mean after like reaching out via email or
Yeah.
something? Yeah.
Well, or even if they want to talk, I see Mr. Bill Clayton,
Yeah.
and Stephen Bucher and other people if they want to talk. I mean, thank you for joining in. If you want to talk, I'm happy to too. And thank you too.
Yeah. If anybody does have any questions or comments, feel free to jump in, guys. Sometimes folks just kind of sit and enjoy. I'll give a moment for that. That's a good.
Okay.
That's worth it. But yeah, just send a message in the chat if you want to say something. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, guys. I will. Yeah, Bill and Rip and Steven, thank you guys for being here. Appreciate that. I can't tell if Bill's trying to chime in or not. Oh, he took his headphones off. All right, I'll do our outro and then we'll end. All right. We have reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. And thank you very much for Uri Caine for joining us today.
Thank you.
As always, we are brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclass, this cutting edge instruction for piano industry masters without leaving your home. If you joined us today by signing up for this session independently, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour, $16 a month. Recording of today's session in our member area, as well as automatic registration for each week's new session is included. You could sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. We got our podcast, we got our Substack, our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and sign up for the email list at the website with just your name and email. Okay. Happy 4th of July. Thank you guys so much for joining today.
Thank
and
you.
Uri, I'll just see you again in a moment back on the Zoom.